The disappearance of the Boeing 777 10 years ago is the world's greatest aviation mystery. The plane was carrying 239 people, including 6 Australians, when it left Kuala Lumpur bound for Beijing. But it never arrived, vanishing somewhere in the Indian Ocean.
Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 was an international passenger flight from Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia to Beijing International Airport in China. It had approximately 227 passengers on board with 10 crew members and 2 pilots. The flight duration was 5 hours and 34 minutes, and the aircraft was carrying approximately 49,000 kilograms of jet fuel at the time of departure. Ideally, for the duration of the flight, approximately 37,000 kilograms of jet fuel is more than sufficient. And the reason why it was carrying additional amount of jet fuel was in case of an emergency, it can land safely to any of the nearby airports. So this was in case of an emergency, and that was one of the reasons why it was carrying additional amount of jet fuel. Now, what happened exactly on the 8th of March 2014 was the aircraft, Malaysian Airlines flight MH370, departed the Kuala Lumpur International Airport, and everything was going as per the procedure. Captain Zahari, when he did even acknowledge when the aircraft was transitioning over from the Lumpur radar to the Ho Chi Minh radar in the Vietnamese airspace. But the moment the aircraft entered the Vietnamese airspace, the connection with the aircraft the communication with the aircraft was lost. Now, the moment the Vietnamese airspace noted that the connection with the communication with the aircraft was lost, it did reach out to a pilot of another aircraft and requested him to reach out to the crew members of the MH370 flight. The pilot of the other aircraft reached out to the MH370 crew members. Now, what happened was it did use the air distress frequency signals, and it did try to reach out to the MH370 crew. The calls were acknowledged. The aircraft did receive the calls. However, no one answered those calls by the aircraft, and this was acknowledged by the aircraft satellite data unit. So clearly the calls went through to the MH370 flight, but no one acknowledged or no one answered those calls. Now, what happened next was 1 hour after the scheduled arrival time, the Malaysian government informed the victims' families or the passenger families members that the aircraft was lost and the search and rescue operations were already in effect. Now, various governments from various places, like the Malaysian government, the Australian government, they joined hands for the search and rescue operations, and they did reach out to the search and rescue, the entire strip where the aircraft was supposed to be found. And it did try to with the help of a simulator, it did try to identify where exactly the flight may have deviated, or if it all may have deviated from its original route, where exactly it may have deviated, and what were the exact possible routes and locations where the aircraft may have deviated. So based on certain techniques and based on the technology, the search and rescue operations team did try to identify places that were nearby and where the aircraft may have deviated from its original route, and did try to locate in those locations. However, the search and rescue operations did not yield any of the results, and it took days, months, and finally it took years. And on the 20th of October 2017, approximately 3 years down the line, it did come across some of the debris of the MH370 flight, which looked exactly or almost similar to the MH370 flight. And this was found in the western Indian Ocean, in the western part of the Indian Ocean. However, like these parts did not exactly cannot be exactly be said that like these were originating from the MH370 flight. So there were certain variations, and so there were certain differences as to whether these parts had exactly originated from the MH370 flight. So although there were some parts recovered, but it cannot be confirmed, it cannot be confirmed that those parts were exactly originating from the MH370 flight. So there were variations, and till date, the search and rescue team has not been able to recover the entire aircraft, like the black box or the aircraft engine or any of the aircraft parts. So still date, the search and rescue operation has not been successful in recovering the aircraft completely.
If Kit was right, he just found a big piece of the puzzle, not far off the coast of South Australia. When did you first think MH370?
Oh, pretty much as soon as we saw it. We thought it. Of course we did. And we got a pretty fair look at it.
Kit regrets not being able to salvage what could be a crucial piece of evidence. He says the wing got stuck in the net of his deep-sea fishing trawler, so he had to cut it free. That was in October 2014, just 7 months after flight MH370 was lost. Kit says he reported his find to authorities soon after he returned to land, and again 3 years later.
They responded by saying that they thought that it could be a container, and I knew it was a container. It was the wing off an aircraft.
What do you say to people who might doubt what you saw that day?
Many people just simply don't believe me. That's up to them. Amongst those criticisms, that I didn't pull my phone out to take a photo. I didn't knock off for a bloody picnic halfway through either. I was busy.
How many wings are sitting on the bottom of the ocean? Big ones, like the wing you found?
I wouldn't have thought many. And that was another part of my thinking. It's not from the MH370. What is it?
Do you think Kit Olver's story is plausible?
Yeah, it is absolutely plausible.
Peter Waring was the Deputy Operations Manager on the first search for MH370, which ended in 2017. It was run by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, or ATSB, and failed to find any trace of the aircraft. Another mission by American company Ocean Infinity was called off in 2018 without any success. The underwater surveyor believes authorities should now take Kit's report seriously.
Provided he has an accurate position, he thinks it's at the bottom and it's not too deep, it would be relatively cheap to send a little sonar out there and scan the seafloor. And a wing, if it was in one piece and lying on the bottom of the seafloor, it would stick out. You'd be able to pick it up very quickly.
We know what the answers would mean to the families of the victims, but what would they mean to you?
For me, it would feel like finally we finished something that we started so long ago. It's always felt like this open book and something that I haven't been entirely able to move on from, and I would love nothing more than to have it finished. And I'm sure that's the case for everyone that worked on the search.
Finding the wreckage would mean even more to Jackie Gonzalez. Her husband, Patrick Gomez, was the chief steward on flight MH370.
I thought we would have answers earlier, way earlier. 10 years? I don't know if I can wait another 10 years.
This doesn't seem fair, does it?
No. A lot of people miss him, not only us. His friends miss him. But 10 years, of course, he's not coming back. So we have to accept it. But we still need to know exactly where he is and how it happened. We just have to wait.
This is Patrick making his way through airport security at Kuala Lumpur for the last time.
This is the safety manual that he has to go through. Usually he will just flick through before he goes on a flight as a refresher.
You can have all the safety manuals in the world, but you could never be prepared for that.
No, it's not even in the safety book. You know, what if the plane goes missing?
The most frustrating thing is that we could now be closer than ever to knowing where the plane is. But no one is willing to go and find it. On top of Kid Olver's discovery, aerospace engineer Richard Godfrey believes he's pinpointed another location where parts of the wreckage could be. Do you feel like the Malaysian government is trying to cover up the truth about MH370?
They are certainly showing very little interest. We have shared our research with them. They say thank you very much, but we never get any response.
4 years ago, Richard started publishing his analysis of thousands of disturbances in radio signals caused by an aircraft on the night of March 8, 2014. He says that plane was MH370, and he used the data to plot the exact flight path into the Indian Ocean. Since then, are you more confident or less confident that you are right?
I'm much more confident. I've been joined by two eminent scientists. We have also offered our research and our programs to academics around the world. We're down to an area, search area, which has a radius of 30 kilometres. So it's something that could be done in just a matter of a couple of weeks.
Richard is in no doubt, but it seems the Malaysian government has reservations. It says it will only restart the search if it receives new and credible evidence. So how much more credible does it have to get?
I don't think it can get much more credible from a scientific point of view. I don't think you could get more precise in knowing the flight route and knowing the crash location.
Why do you think there hasn't been any further searches?
If the aircraft or the pilot or the airline is in some way found to be at fault for the disappearance, then the Malaysian government, as the ultimate owner of the airline and MH370, are exposed to compensation claims. In my view, they would prefer to bury the issue rather than solve it.
It's the most contentious issue about the aircraft's disappearance. The failed searches for MH370 have all been based on the same assumption, that no one was in control of the plane when it crashed into the ocean. But a decade on, many experts believe authorities got it wrong.
If there's someone at the controls all the way to the end, then the search area is very, very different than the one we actually looked at. And that scenario, I don't believe has ever adequately been considered, certainly wasn't by the Australian government. We'd drawn this box, this search box, and really at one point I think we just became incapable of thinking outside of it.
But the ATSB still stands by its search, even after Kit's reported discovery and Richard's research into the flight path.
We are an evidence-based organisation, and at the moment we don't have new evidence to suggest that what we assessed at the time was incorrect.
So what you're saying is, for the families of those on board, that original search is as good as it gets?
Well, it was as good as it got 10 years ago with the evidence available, but tragically, and for the families, it didn't yield results.
Angus Mitchell became the Chief Commissioner of the ATSB in 2021, 4 years after the organisation stopped searching for MH370. These boxes that sit in his office were built to house the flight recorders the ATSB hoped to salvage from the wreckage. But now they're a daily reminder his team failed to find anything. There's only two reasons that your search failed. Either you missed the aircraft or you were looking in the wrong spot. Which one do you think is more likely?
Well, I think it's probably a combination. Some of the resolution of that search area was with a high degree of accuracy, and we didn't find it there. So that would suggest that some of where we're looking wasn't the right spot. Now, where the right spot is, if we knew that, we would have searched there.
It's little comfort for Jackie and her family, who will never accept authorities could just give up looking for Patrick.
They've insulted my family and all the other families on board, thinking that they're nothing. They're not nothing. They're dads, they're moms, brothers, sisters, aunties, uncles, children, family members. They're not just a thing that we lost.
What you'd give for a hug from Patrick?
Yeah. What I would give for a hug, a fight, anything, but it's not coming.
It's really troubling, in fact, that not only have we got to this 10-year mark, but there's absolutely nothing in the way of it becoming 20 years very quickly.
For somebody who worked at the heart of that initial search, how does that sit with you?
Well, none of it has ever sat well with me, actually, to be honest. I think it troubles my thoughts repeatedly, and it just seems to really tear at the fabric of reality that a whole jetline of 239 people on board, one of the biggest jetliners there is, just disappeared.
When 239 people vanish, you'd think authorities would never give up the search to find them. Fuad Sharuji fears that's exactly what's happened in the case of MH370.
There's no answer, no closure. That is a saddest part.
The weeks and months after the Boeing 777 went missing were the most stressful time in Fuad's career. You must have felt like the weight of the world was on your shoulders.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. I felt that everything is all on me.
He was in charge of managing the crisis at Malaysia Airlines.
If we could rewind the clock, there were certain things that we could have done differently, yes.
What is the number one thing you would do differently?
We could have improved on the intercommunication with the various government agencies rather than being disjointed. The police is doing something, the military is doing something else, the Ministry of Transport. It wasn't very effective.
Like so many affected by this disaster, Fuad is desperate to know what went wrong and why. But there's one possibility he will never accept, that it was a deliberate act of mass murder by his friend and colleague of 30 years, the pilot, Captain Zahari Hamad Shah.
He does not have the capacity or the character of an assassin.
But many have speculated that because he had plotted an almost identical flight path on his home simulator, it proves he had evil intentions.
There were 3,000 flights on his flight simulator. There was only one flight that went to Indian Ocean.
What other reason could Captain Zahari have been plotting that flight for?
I do not know. I mean, it's very common for pilots to practice ditching and landing on the sea, and to take away his own lives. It is not...
You can't fathom it?
I can't fathom it at all.
Why do you think nobody wanted to entertain the idea that somebody was at the controls of the plane when it went into the ocean?
It was psychologically very challenging to consider that someone may have cut off oxygen to all of the passengers and then flown the aircraft for hours and hours afterwards. I think that the psychological profile of someone that would do that is so far off the scale that it was very difficult for people to think about.
The only way to prove that theory is to find the wreckage. Peter Waring tried in 2015. He worked on the first search for MH370. But the undersea surveyor believes the mission was doomed to fail as soon as the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, or ATSB, was put in charge.
The Australian government made a fundamental mistake in assuming that a transportation investigation authority could run a search, and not just any search, but the largest search in human history. I think that comes back to just the fundamental problem, which was that the ATSB, despite being full of well-intentioned people that I still consider friends, it was not the right organisation was not the right agency to be running the search.
Do you think the ATSB was the best person for the job?
This certainly wasn't an ATSB solo effort. This was very much a multinational effort to search for the plane that, tragically was unsuccessful at the time.
Now, since it's been 10 years, what we can hope is the victim families, they can recover from this tragedy and they get compensated as soon as possible. Now, the reason why the victims' family members have not been compensated is because the cause of the crash is not known. So the only hopes that we have from all the governments, especially the Malaysian government, is that they compensate the victims' family members, and that's it.
10 years on, the ATSB's Angus Mitchell admits they're no closer to finding the plane. He's examined Richard Godfrey's research and is aware of Kit Olver's claim to have found the wing of MH370 off the coast of South Australia. But the Chief Commissioner says it's still not enough. What's stopping you from launching a search?
Well, it's not an ATSB decision to commit government resources to a search. It sits initially with a state of registry. That would then come to the Australian government if there was a request for the Australian government to assist, who then would decide whether or not it was an ATSB role.
Is it something that you're pushing for?
I'm pushing for the ability to continue investigating all of those other. There's been 900 odd investigations in the aviation section in the last 10 years since this incident.
Surely this is the most important one, though.
Well, I think they're all important. So I've got over 200 fatalities in that last 10 years in aviation. But ultimately there are some things that are beyond our capabilities, and at this stage that's where the MH370 sits.
That's awful, and that's awful for the families of those loved ones.
Absolutely, and that's something that sits very heavily with our staff as well.
What more could the Australian government do?
Well, I think the Australian government needs to potentially co-sponsor a new search and put some pressure, if they can, on the Malaysians. We started something, and I think most Australians would agree that once you start something, you should try and finish it.
No matter who you speak to about MH370, everyone wants the same thing: for someone to step up and resume the search for the missing plane. You'd think the 10-year anniversary would be a good time for the Malaysian government to do it. But there is little hope. No one from the Prime Minister down would speak to us, not even just to acknowledge the endless pain of the families left behind.
I'm angry because they're not acknowledging what they're supposed to do. They promised, we'll find the plane, we'll do everything that we can, we won't give up.
A decade after losing her husband Patrick in the tragedy, Jackie Gonzalez has to accept their granddaughter will never get to meet him. The only thing she can hope for is to one day lay him to rest. If you could say something to Patrick, what would you say to him?
Have fun up there, have a beer on us, whisper in our ear, talk to your grandchildren. What else can I tell him to do? But to rest in peace.
Kit Olver can't stop thinking about just how close he might have come to solving the mystery of MH370.
And it seems to be troubling me more now than it has in the past. And I saw a couple of programs on the relatives of the victims. And you've got to feel, can I contribute? Maybe.
Today, the greatest hope lies with Ocean Infinity, the American company who last searched for MH370 in 2018. They told us they want to try again in a different area of the Indian Ocean later this year. But they need the support of the Malaysian government.
Without that, what we really need is generous philanthropist who was willing to spend some money on a new search. So that's really the next question. Are you willing to go out there and solve the greatest mystery of the 21st century? And I hope the answer is yes.